Anthony, take us through the global threats in cyber terrorism, and in particular, how these threats are trending and impacting the Australian market.
Well, the majority of attacks today are kind of derivatives of attacks that have occurred historically. They're still leveraging tried and true breach mechanisms such as phishing attacks, social media breaches, leveraging drive-bys on websites, i.e. you click on a link and download a bad piece of software. What's changed recently is that the attacks, from a payload perspective, what you're downloading is no longer just pilfering credentials or credit card numbers. They're actually starting to embed on computers, encrypt data, lock you out of your own data, wipe data, destroy, be destructive on endpoint systems. And so this is posing a lot of challenges for corporations globally as well as people at home in their personal lives.
What steps are you seeing companies take to protect themselves from these threats? And is it possible to protect yourself from all of these threats?
Yeah. So you can be vigilant and diligent. You can do things like educating and awareness programs around teaching your employees how to not get trapped on a phishing scam or click on a link that they shouldn't click on or go to a bad site. That said, it's always going to occur. It's really incumbent upon these companies to make sure they have good antivirus on their endpoints, that they have good backup and data resiliency on their file shares and their hard drives. Make sure that there's always a backup, that God forbid your data got wiped or it got locked out, that you can recover it with nominal impact to your business.
Absolutely. Fergus, are Australian organizations providing the right level of attention to cyber risks?
Short answer is no, definitely not. I think we need to define cyber first to really answer that question properly. So cyber is much broader than purely organizational security or IT security. Cyber takes into account several other things, including the risk of the people that run the technology, as well as the various different climates that are going on around. So if we look at it holistically, while Australian companies are quite technologically advanced and have implemented a lot of point products, if you like, in a sort of protective security space, I don't think that they've looked at the bigger picture, and the general evidence that we see is not so much. This is really to do with operational maturity. Organisations are sort of starting on the path. At the beginning of the path, they put in point products. You've got your antivirus and your firewalls and these kind of things that we hear about all the time because they're marketed to death, basically. And then potentially they might start looking down, putting into place some policies and procedures, things like ISO 27001, things like NIST, that stretch out the controls into other areas. Although again, they're purely sort of checklist frameworks, if you like. All the policies and procedures that go in and around need to be implemented as well. I see very few companies who are completely on top of that and then have actually got into we are ready to respond mode. That's and sort of critical response and incident response, critical issue response is where I'm really seeing the gaps.
Interesting. Has there been an increase in our clients in terms of executive roles around creating new executive positions around cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of some of these frameworks, and if we follow the models of the rest of the world, there's certainly been new positions created in the last 10 years that companies have adopted, things like your chief security officer, chief privacy officer. Privacy officer in general doesn't have to be a chief. And sometimes these roles, because Australian organisations tend to be smaller than their US or European counterparts, these are sort of sub-roles that are created within an existing position, but they're quite clearly defined. You have responsibility for this, you have responsibility for that. An interesting comment I will make on this one, though, is that in a lot of cases, the person who looked after the point security products, i.e. the firewall administrator, has in some cases been promoted to the chief security officer because of the reason that he's the best person qualified or she's the best person qualified for the job. And in some cases, those people are not necessarily qualified to look at the organisational risks that are involved with cyber.
Right, so goes back to your earlier comment about there needing to be a holistic view of what these cyber exposures are in an organization as opposed to a siloed approach.
Absolutely.